3 gross facts that prove the Middle Ages were even dirtier than we thought. It wasn't always clean and healthy to live in the Middle Ages. In the past, people didn't live nearly as long as they do now. One big reason for this is that medical care, basic cleanliness, and food quality were all much worse than they are now. Still, it's hard to say how bad those things really were. We are, after all, talking about a time period that happened many hundreds of years ago. Being able to imagine how gross everyday life must have been back then is hard. That's the reason we're here today. This list will show you what life was really like for peasants in the Middle Ages. Their lives were terrible, their jobs were hard, and they were only occasionally happy. They were dirty all over. This is the true story of how gross life was in the Middle Ages. Number 3. Simple dental care. In the Middle Ages, people didn't have things like toothbrushes, because they didn't have any to clean their teeth. Peasants used sticks to get rid of any extra food, at least the ones they could find and get rid of. Of course, they had no idea what plaque and gingivitis were or how to treat them. Some poor people would even put a piece of wool over their teeth and then rinse their mouths with water. People who were a little better off and had access to salt would mix it with sage to make a very basic paste that could help clean their breath. It would even whiten their teeth. Though whiten isn't really the right word because dental care back then was so bad. Even though this sounds awful, things weren't really that bad for peasants. That's because they didn't eat much sugar. They did not have any money to pay for sugar that came from strange places, if it was ever brought in at all. That's why their teeth held up better than you'd think without it. Still, the work they did to remove a bad tooth was absolutely horrible. There was no such thing as being asleep. It was also the time when dentists were more like murderers than doctors. Poor people would often get very drunk before having their teeth pulled to make the pain go away as much as possible. It didn't work very often. 2. Wine to heal wounds. Peasants didn't just drink alcohol to dull their feelings when they had to get basic dental work done. In the past, wine was also used as a medicine to help people get better and put them to sleep. Most peasants thought that prayer would cure all of their health problems, which makes sense, since the church was such an important part of their lives. They went there for help since they didn't go to school much, if at all. But over time, people in Europe started to learn more about science and health, because when it did, it showed up in some strange, but logical, ways. Let's look at how wine was used to clean wounds. During the Middle Ages, doctors in the most basic hospitals and surgery centers learned that alcohol could be used to clean wounds. Not only that, but they also learned that any cuts they made could be sealed off with a cautery. At the end of any kind of surgery in the Middle Ages, the person would be doused in wine and then burned back until their skin closed, because no one knew the first thing about cleanliness. As you might expect, a lot of people died from infections. Still, you might be able to get drunk and bathe in wine while you were dying. Good? Number 1. They did wash their hands. Though, this may be the craziest fact of all, a lot of peasants in the Middle Ages washed their hands. Like, all the time. In the Middle Ages, keeping your hands clean was seen as a very important habit. It had to do with showing that you were proud of how you looked. To keep your hands clean and free of dirt and grime was also seen as good manners. In the Middle Ages, people didn't know about germs and bugs that could be seen, but they still wanted to wash their hands often to show how polite they were. That's what they did. When people washed their hands properly, they did a few things. First, whenever they woke up, they always washed their hands and faces with whatever water they could find. After that, they kept washing their hands at different times during the day. They often washed their hands before and after dinner to make sure they were clean enough for the food. Also, that was very important because there wasn't really any silverware. Almost everyone in the Middle Ages, especially peasants, ate with their hands. They usually grabbed food from a common bowl or dish the dirty way. In that case, you should hope that everyone else washed their hands too.